I was folding my husband's laundry and watching the World Cup match when I saw him kiss another woman on live television, in front of 80,000 people, in a stadium 4,000 miles from our home. He had told me it was a business trip. He had told me it was about the World Cup, about clients, about a hospitality package he could not turn down. I believed him, because 19 years of marriage teaches you to believe the person lying next to you every night. And then the camera panned across the crowd, and there he was, and there she was, and his hand was on the back of her neck, the way his hand used to be on the back of mine. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Claire Ashford, and for 19 years I believed I understood the man I married. Daniel and I met in our late 20s, in a way that felt unremarkable at the time and only became a story we told at dinner parties years later. The kind of story where both people laugh at slightly different parts because they remember it slightly differently. He worked in commercial real estate, the kind of job that requires charm more than it requires anything you can put on a spreadsheet, and he was good at it in the specific way that made people trust him within minutes of meeting him. I trusted him within minutes of meeting him, too. We married 2 years later, bought a house in a suburb outside Charlotte, North Carolina, and had our daughter, Sophie, when I was 31. For most of that time, our marriage looked, from the outside and from the inside, like something that worked. I want to be honest about that, because it matters for what comes later. This was not a marriage that limped along for 2 decades out of habit or fear. Daniel and I still talked at the end of the day. We still argued about small things, the thermostat, whose turn it was to deal with the in-laws at Thanksgiving, and we still, more often than either of us would have admitted to our friends, laughed until one of us had to leave the room. I am telling you this because I need you to understand that what happened did not happen to a woman who was looking for exits. It happened to a woman who believed completely that she did not need one. The trip came up in April, almost 11 weeks before the tournament began. Daniel worked with a mid-sized firm that handled commercial leasing for retail chains expanding into new markets, and one of his larger clients, a company opening a string of sports bars timed to World Cup viewership, wanted him present at several matches to close deals with local partners, while the energy of the tournament was at its peak. He explained it to me over dinner, the way he explained most work things, with a kind of practiced ease that made complicated things sound simple. 10 days, overseas, client-facing. He would be gone for the group stage and come home before the knockout rounds began. I remember nodding along, more interested in whether Sophie had finished her chemistry homework than in the details of stadium hospitality contracts, because this was the kind of trip Daniel took 2 or 3 times a year. It did not occur to me to ask more questions, because in 19 years, I had never had a reason to. Looking back now, there were details in those 11 weeks that I noticed and did not examine, the way you notice a crack in a ceiling and tell yourself you will deal with it eventually. Daniel started taking phone calls in the garage instead of the kitchen. He replaced his cologne, a scent he had worn since before we met, with something new that he said a colleague had recommended. He put a passcode on a phone that had never had one in 19 years, and when I asked him about it, half joking, he said something about a new company policy on device security, and I let it go, because questioning your husband's phone passcode over the sound of dinner cooking felt, at the time, like the kind of thing insecure wives did in movies, not something a woman with a marriage like mine needed to do. The tournament began on a Thursday in June, and Daniel flew out 3 days before the opening match to handle what he called logistics. Sophie and I fell into the rhythm familiar to any household with a parent traveling: takeout on weeknights, a slightly quieter house, a nightly phone call that lasted 12 minutes and covered the same 3 topics every time. He sounded tired but happy, the way people sound when they are somewhere warm and busy and slightly overstimulated by a new place. I did not think, even once, to wonder whether the tiredness in his voice had a source I hadn't considered. It was a Saturday evening, 10 days into the trip, when everything I believed about my life quietly and permanently ended. Sophie and I were in the living room with the match on in the background, more ambient noise than entertainment, while I folded a basket of laundry that had been sitting on the couch since Wednesday. The broadcast cut to a wide shot of the crowd, the kind every network runs during a lull in play, scanning for painted faces and flags, and the particular joy of people who have paid a great deal of money to be uncomfortable in a stadium seat for the privilege of being part of something enormous. And then, for perhaps 4 seconds, the camera settled on a man in a navy polo I recognized, because I had bought it for him at a store in Myrtle Beach 2 summers earlier, his arm around a woman with dark hair who was laughing up at him, and then his hand moved to the back of her neck, and he kissed her, unmistakably, the way a person kisses someone they have kissed many times before. I did not scream. I did not drop anything. I sat very still on the couch with a dish towel half folded in my lap, and I said nothing to Sophie, who thankfully had her eyes on her phone and not the television. And I told myself, with the particular desperation of a person trying to negotiate with reality, that I had misread the moment, that the lighting had been strange, that 4 seconds on a shaky camera feed from a stadium in another country was not enough evidence to end a marriage over. I told myself this 3 separate times as I rewound the recording on our DVR, and 3 separate times, the footage told me something different than what I wanted to believe. I did not confront Daniel that night, and I want to explain why, because I know how that decision looks from the outside. 11 years earlier, early in our marriage, I had confronted him over what turned out to be an entirely innocent late-night dinner with a female coworker, and the fight that followed had cost us months of a trust I had built out of nothing but my own insecurity. I had sworn to myself after that experience that I would never again accuse my husband of something I could not prove, and so, sitting in my living room with my hands shaking and my daughter 3 feet away doing her algebra homework, I made a decision that would define everything that followed. I would find out the truth first, completely and privately, before I said a single word to him. The next morning, I called my closest friend, Monica Pierce, a woman I had known since our children were in the same preschool class, and who had, over the years, become the person I called when a situation required both loyalty and a clear head. I told her what I had seen, and to her enormous credit, she did not tell me I was overreacting, and she did not tell me to calm down. She told me to send her the clip, and within an hour, she had done something I would never have thought to do myself. She had run the footage through a reverse image search using a still frame, and while the tool could not identify the woman by name, it did confirm something I had not wanted to consider, that the stadium seating section visible behind them corresponded to a hospitality tier reserved for corporate sponsors, not the general client seating Daniel's company had told me his group would occupy. That detail sat with me for 2 days before I understood why it mattered. If Daniel had been seated with a woman in premium sponsor seating rather than his own client group, then whoever she was not a stranger he had met in a crowd that afternoon. She was someone he had planned to sit beside. I want to pause here and tell you something about the following 2 weeks, because I think it is the part of this story people understand least when they hear it secondhand. I did not fall apart. I got up every morning, made Sophie's lunch, went to my job at a regional accounting firm where I had worked for 12 years, and came home and made dinner, all while carrying a piece of information that I knew would eventually detonate my entire life. People sometimes ask how a person functions like that, and the honest answer is that grief and suspicion, when they have nowhere to go yet, simply get folded into the ordinary hours of a day, the way a stone gets folded into a river and the water simply moves around it. The next piece of the picture came from our joint bank statements, which I had always glanced at but never studied, because in 19 years of marriage I had never had a reason to distrust the numbers. I studied them now. Buried among the ordinary charges, groceries, gas, a recurring gym membership, was a credit card I did not recognize, opened 4 years earlier, with statements mailed to a post office box I had never heard of. I called the card company under the pretense of a fraud inquiry, and a patient representative confirmed the account holder's name, Daniel Ashford, and read me the most recent charge. A 2-night stay for 2 guests at a hotel in a city Daniel had told me, in a phone call 4 days earlier, that he had never visited. By the time Daniel came home, 9 days after I had seen him on that broadcast, I knew 3 things for certain. That the woman was not a stranger, that this was not the first time, and that whatever this was, it had a financial structure to it that had existed for years, not weeks. What I did not yet know was who she was, how long it had truly gone on, or what it had cost us, in every sense of that word, while I had been folding laundry and believing I understood my own life. Daniel walked through our front door tanned and lighter in the way people are after travel, kissed me on the cheek, hugged Sophie, and asked what was for dinner. And I looked at this man I had loved for 19 years and I said, quite calmly, that dinner was almost ready. And I did not say one word about the stadium, or the hotel, or the credit card, because I had already decided, 3 weeks earlier on that couch, that when I finally spoke, I would speak with everything in my hand, and nothing left for him to explain away. It took another 6 weeks to find her name, and I want to walk you through how, because it matters for what happened next. Monica, who by this point had become something between a friend and an investigator, identified the sports bar chain client Daniel's company had been servicing, and cross-referenced the corporate hospitality vendor that had supplied premium seating for that account. From there, a company directory, publicly available on a website meant to showcase client partnerships, listed the vendor's regional account manager for international hospitality packages. Her name was Alina Reyes, 34 years old, based in Atlanta, and her professional photograph, when I finally found it, showed the same dark hair and the same face I had seen laughing up at my husband on live television. For 3 days, I sat with her name the way you sit with a diagnosis, turning it over, trying to make it smaller than it was. And then, because I have never in my life been a person who could leave a wound unexamined, I did something that surprised even Monica. I did not tell Daniel what I knew. I reached out to Alina Reyes directly. I sent her a message through a professional networking site, brief and careful, saying only that I believed we shared a mutual acquaintance and that there was something important I needed to discuss with her privately. I expected silence or hostility or nothing at all. What I got, 2 days later, was a reply that began to unravel a story far larger and far more devastating than the one I thought I had uncovered. Alina wrote back cautiously at first, the way anyone would to a stranger's vague message, but agreed to a phone call once I explained, as gently as I could manage, who I was. And on that call, over the course of 40 minutes that I will remember for the rest of my life, Alina Reyes told me that she had been in a committed relationship with a man named Daniel for just over 2 years, a man she knew as a widower, a man who had told her, in detail, about the wife he had lost to illness 4 years earlier, about the grief that had nearly ended him, about how meeting her had been the first time he had felt whole again since the funeral. I sat on my kitchen floor while she spoke, because my legs would no longer hold me, and I understood in that moment that this was not simply an affair. My husband had built an entire second life on the foundation of my death, a death that had never happened, to a woman who believed she was not the other woman in a marriage, but the second chance in a widower's story, and who had spent 2 years falling in love with a man on the understanding that she was doing something honest. Alina told me things that made the picture worse with every sentence. She had met people she believed were Daniel's late wife's parents, an older couple who had been kind to her and had spoken, briefly and sadly, about the daughter they had lost. People I would later learn were paid actors sourced through a private event staffing service, hired for a single afternoon lunch designed to make Alina's grief-adjacent relationship feel real. She had planned a future with this man. She had, only 3 months earlier, begun looking at apartments in Charlotte, the very city I lived in, because Daniel had told her his work was relocating him there, and he wanted her to come with him. The two of us, strangers 3 days earlier, spent the next week rebuilding a timeline together, comparing dates, comparing photographs, comparing the small details of a man neither of us had fully known. What emerged was a portrait of remarkable, methodical deception. 2 households run in parallel for over 2 years. 2 women each told a story engineered specifically to be believable to them, and a financial structure quietly built to support both. An account I had never known existed, funded in part, we discovered, by transfers from a savings account Daniel, and I had opened when Sophie was 8 years old, meant to grow untouched until she left for college. That discovery, more than the affair itself, more even than the fabricated death, was the moment my sorrow turned into something with an edge to it. I could, perhaps, in some distant and painful way, have eventually understood a man who fell into an affair and did not know how to climb back out of it. I could not find any understanding for a man who had taken money meant for his daughter's future to fund a fictional death and a second engagement ring, which Alina, her voice breaking on the phone, confirmed he had already shown her, told her he intended to propose within the year. I confronted Daniel on a Tuesday evening in early September, in our kitchen, with Sophie safely at a friend's house and Alina, at her own insistence, present by video call on my laptop, because she had told me she needed to see his face when the two halves of his life finally met each other. I will not pretend this was a calm conversation, but it was not the shouting match either of us might once have imagined. Daniel's face, when he understood what was happening, when he saw Alina's name on the screen and understood that his two lives had found each other without his permission, did something I had never seen it do in 19 years of marriage. It simply emptied. There was no elaborate lie left to offer, no charm left to deploy, only a man sitting at his own kitchen table with nothing left to manage. What followed in the months after was slower and less dramatic than the discovery itself, which is, I have come to believe, how most consequences actually work in real life. I filed for divorce in October. The missing funds from Sophie's college account became part of the legal proceedings, and Daniel's firm, once made aware through the divorce filing of the fabricated business travel and the misuse of shared financial accounts, opened its own internal review, which eventually cost him his position, not because infidelity was their concern, but because company hospitality budgets had, it turned out, quietly subsidized more of his travel with Alina than either of us had first realized. Alina and I did not become friends exactly, but we became something neither of us had a name for. Two women who had been deceived by the same architecture of lies, who had compared notes and found, in each other, the only person who fully understood what the last 2 years had actually been. We spoke less as the months passed, as both of us rebuilt separate lives, but I think of her sometimes, and I hope, wherever she is now, that she has found something real to replace the story she was told. Sophie is 17 now, and she knows most of this. In the careful, age-appropriate way, a mother tells a daughter that the world is more complicated than childhood allows you to believe. She asked me once, several months after the divorce was finalized, whether I regretted waiting so long to confront her father, whether I wished I had simply screamed at him the night I saw the broadcast. I told her the truth, which is that I do not regret it, because the woman who found out everything quietly, methodically, and completely was able to protect herself and her daughter in ways the woman who reacted in anger that first night never could have. I think about that broadcast sometimes, the 4 seconds of footage that ended a 19-year marriage, and what strikes me now is not the kiss itself, but how ordinary the moment looked from the outside. A man in a crowd, a woman laughing, nothing that would have caught anyone else's attention. I have learned in the year since that the difference between a life that holds together and a life that quietly comes apart is rarely visible from a distance. It takes someone standing close enough and paying enough attention to see the crack in the foundation before the whole structure gives way. I was, in the end, standing close enough, and for that, difficult as it was, I am grateful. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way through. If it moved you, made you think, or reminded you of something in your own life, we would love to hear from you in the comments below. And if you want to keep hearing stories like Claire, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss what we share next.